Like I said, this is part of our Ask the Expert series, and today we're going to talk about how to work with partners. These are sessions with thought leaders and SMEs from our community who offer their insights to you. Before we go ahead and get started, I want to just pull up our forward-looking statements here. If there are any forward-looking statements made about ServiceNow and or future capabilities coming down the pike, these are not implicit promises that those will actually occur. And also, this event is being recorded for future use, so please don't reveal any confidential information about your company or yourself that you wouldn't like to be made public. All right, so our agenda today is we will introduce our speaker panel, and then we'll move into our topics, which first we'll talk about how to prepare for the kickoff and the workshops. Then we'll move on to what to expect when working with a partner. From there, we'll talk about ensuring that there's a warm handoff at the end of the project. And we'll talk a little bit about how to pick a partner. And so I'm sure you're eager to meet our panel. So let's go ahead and meet our speakers. I'm going to try to do these in alphabetical order, so there's no preference here. So Laszlo, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Laszlo. I work as a certified technical architect. I work on the customer side right now with Siemens Healthineers, but I used to be a partner. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Laszlo. And Susan?
Hey, Susan Britt from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I lead our employee workflows practice at Desby Technologies.
And I had the privilege of meeting Susan at World Forum last week. That was awesome. John?
Hi, I'm John Feist, located in Hillsborough, New Jersey, and I am part of a customer. I work at Integra Life Sciences, and I'm the main support person for ServiceNow at Integra.
And Anders?
Hi, I'm Anders. I'm from Oslo, Norway. I'm a certified master architect, and I currently work for a partner, KPMG.
And Willem?
Yeah, I'm Willem Zeiler, also a certified master architect. I also work for a partner, Platformation.
All right, and if any of you have been to any of my webinars, you know that I like to run a poll. So we're going to go ahead and start a poll here to kick off our first topic, to find out like how you would prepare for working with a partner. So would you wait until you hear from them before you do anything? Would you gather relevant content, plan who's going to be on your team, review the contract? You can select multiple answers here. I'm glad to see nobody's saying wait until I hear from them. That's a good answer to avoid, if possible. All right, anybody else want to chime in the poll here? Yep, gather relevant content, that's a good one. All right, I know we have a small group today, so don't be shy. And there's also no dumb questions if you don't know the answer. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So it looks like most people would gather content, and then the rest of the group would also plan who would be on their team and review their contract in advance. But let's turn it over to our experts here, Susan and John, and let them talk about how we would prepare to work with a partner.
Okay, so the way we plan things, I will start talking about kickoff and workshops from the customer perspective. And I'll start with the first point, and that is you're the customer. And, that means a whole lot of things, but most significantly, as you're invoking good project management practices and all that goes with that, that you need to be in the lead position. How many project managers you need, et cetera, that will vary based on what you're doing. But, somebody has to be the number one lead. And as the customer, that's your normal function. It's really, really important, and you can see it in big blue letters there on the right, to understand that you have to be working as one team. It's none of this us and them, and if they hadn't, then we would have. You have to be able to work together, iron out your differences, resolve your problems without finger pointing, because all that does is waste time. The next thing is you have to let the partner know what your instance looks like, because the partner comes in, they know the product, they know the project you're on, they know what the ServiceNow offerings are, but they don't know how you've configured your instance. One of the things that we had to do was set up what I call internal firewalling, because we have multiple different help desks in the one instance. And some of those help desks have information that we can't have everybody else seeing. So if I don't tell my partner about that, they're going to come back scratching their heads a whole lot. And along with that, you have to make sure that you tell them what products you have licensed, because in a lot of cases, they may be assuming you have integration spokes, but you're on the very basic level. And since they don't, ServiceNow, last time I asked, wasn't selling them a la carte, it runs into the question, do you want to spend $50,000 to get one more spoke? The next thing, you have to know your value proposition. Understand how you're going to be measured for success and what the metrics to that are. And again, that's something that you have to know. Your partner can't really tell you that. And as Britta had on the poll a moment ago, you have to know your contract, because, and I'm just going to use a real simple, silly example. If the contract says the partner is going to do business rules, and now you come back and say, oh yeah, but I also need client scripts, that's going to have an impact on your budget. Really, really important. You have to manage expectations across the board. It's one thing for your partner and you to get together and understand, okay, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, but you have to get your organization involved. You have to get everybody together, understand, coming out of your first kickoff, all the different parts of your organization, not just your IT organization, but all the users who could potentially be involved or impacted, to understand the project and then tell you one of three things. We need to be actively involved, we need to be kept informed, or this has nothing to do with us. And that can get really important, because I think most of you know that the real horror comes with what I call the OEF phase of systems development, where you're ready to go into testing and somebody pops up their head and says, oh yeah, but we also need to. So you really have to follow good project management and all the rest of it. And finally, you have to be very, very clear when you're setting up your RACI, so that everybody understands roles and responsibilities, and understand very clearly that you don't have a baselineable project plan until you have real resource commitments, because you can't be sitting there saying, oh yeah, well, when we need them, we'll go to the DBAs and tell them we need somebody for 4 hours a day for the next 2 weeks, and we need them starting tomorrow, because they may not have somebody available. Susan, your turn.
All right. So from a ServiceNow partner perspective, I think one of the key things that we need to emphasize, and both sides understand, is we are partners on this journey together. All right. That what that means essentially is, as a partner, we're not order takers. We don't want the customer coming to us and telling us, here's what I want you to do in solution. But we don't want to go to a customer and say, here's what we're going to do for you. It truly is about that collaboration and alignment on your business objectives. And so business objectives are really, what are you trying to accomplish with this project that's in implementation? We've discovered that in a pre-sale cycle, hopefully, from whoever signed the contract. But a lot of times that's your big strategic objectives. And so when you get into your workshops, we like to ask that again from the individual stakeholders. And the reason why, they have different angles, different thoughts and processes. And the more we can accomplish within the scope of the project, the better. But that also helps us potentially build out a roadmap. And then also is talking points. Is that what's in it for them when we get to organizational change management and start trying to build that excitement and that adoption. We want to be able to communicate, here's the goal you wanted, here's how we achieved it, right? The next thing is during the kickoff, we want to have our clearly defined scope. To John's point, he said, we want to understand what are we trying to do? We're going to stay aligned on that. And that really helps us keep everyone aligned, prevents those frustrations. When you get into a project, there's nothing worse than failed or missed expectations. And we want to keep everyone happy, but also avoid those infamous change orders that none of us like to do around the scope, right? And then having those clearly defined roles and responsibilities. John talked about it. You as the customer need to remember that. Us as the partner need to do that. And hopefully before the kickoff, you've already identified the resources that are going to fill those different roles into the project. And you've communicated with them their expectations and those time commitments, because there is a big time commitment when you're going to a project. We need to be realistic with that. I personally like to recommend that kickoff meeting start with a keynote from some C-level executive, a CIO, a CTO, a CHRO, really to get that buy-in, explaining to all those stakeholders, why are we doing this as an organization? What's the importance and the priority of it? And it really does get that engagement from everyone. They're like, oh, if they think this, I need to be excited about it and think it as well. And then before the kickoff, hopefully you've identified what workshops you're going to need based on that scope. So like, what meetings are we going to need to have? Who needs to attend those meetings? How long are they going to last? Is there any prep work we need to do to be prepared? We want to be set up for success and know all that ahead of time. And then know the outcomes and the agenda of those meetings. I think from the attendees' perspective, it's really imperative that we not only have those decision makers and process owners, but you have those stakeholders involved, because they're the ones in the weeds, in the trenches every day. We like to say, you know, like they know what's happening. You may have that policy or process. I call it the yeah, but phase to John's, oh yeah. But it's like, yeah, we do that, but we also do this, or we have to do X, Y before we get to Z, because they know the gaps, they know the frustrations from their end users, their customers, and we want to solve for all of that. So we want them involved early, make that time commitment, and don't bring them in just for sprint reviews or UAT that causes changes in requirements.
That is so true.
Yeah, it saves a lot of trouble if we could just bring them all in. It is a big time commitment, but it's worth it in the end. And then the last thing I like to talk through is just working expectations. It's a very broad and kind of vague topic on its own, but really from a project management perspective, you know, what time zones are we going to work in? You know, you want to make that clear, you know, who's doing what, who's setting up the meetings that we're going to have, what's the cadence of this meeting? Are we using Teams? Are we using Zoom? You know, those little things, to then the actual implementation, working expectations. Who's doing the deployment from your sub-prod instances to production? Is that us, the partner? Is that you, the customer? Are we doing that, you know, in unison together? Or is there onboarding activities? Do we need to do background checks or certain, you know, hardware we need to have installed to actually access your instance? All of those things that we need to think through to help us avoid obstacles and hurdles that are going to impact our timeline and productivity. And this time of year we're in is really big, at least in my world, employee workflow. This year end, we got change freezes from IT, HR and finance are doing, you know, year-end processing, holidays and vacations. If we can know that 3 months in advance, we can plan for it, right? So we want to know things as early as often, and then reconfirm throughout the project to see if there's any changes.
100%. So many of those things are so true. All right, well, those are some of the pitfalls and things to know about working with a partner from the customer and the partner perspective. Next up, you know, what is your expectation of working with a partner? So let's bring up another poll here and see what people think about that. So you can have multiple answers to this, you know, but what is your expectation when the partner comes in? You know, I've been in projects where they expect the partner or us as expert services to come in and do everything. Sometimes they think, you know, you're there for decision making, but they're going to do the heavy lifting. They'll provide best practices, they'll help with project management. I mean, there's multiple other things I could list here, but just trying to get a feel for what your thoughts are of how that partner customer engagement would go. So it looks like a lot of people are saying they'll help with coding, they'll provide best practices, and they'll help with some decision making and a little bit of project management. So anybody else want to throw in an answer to the poll here before I shut that down? All right. We'll go ahead and end the poll, and then I'm going to turn this over to our next speakers to talk about some of the expectations of working with partners.
Yeah, thank you, Britta. So Anders and I will talk to you a bit about the level of effort. And we chose this picture because the clear expectations, the roles, responsibilities, that's all okay. But if you're then keep following the course, sticking to your guns, like they say, both putting in maybe 50% of the effort, right? You end up with this situation. So a nicely built bridge, but it doesn't align well. I compare it a bit with a good marriage that's not putting in 50-50. It's both putting in 100%, right? That's also why we call ourselves partners, and customers are looking for partners. It's somebody that really is transparent in maybe shortcomings, is also keeping you accountable from both sides. So it's say, hey, we don't have maybe the right resource here. Can you help us out? And that can be from both sides. During the workshops, it can be that customers say, we don't have a process for it. And then we help them understand you actually do have a process. And maybe it's tied up into loose emails, email boxes, or Excel sheets. But you actually have a process. It looks just a bit scattered, and we can help structure it. Those kind of conversations to align and have a nice solid bridge that also connects well together.
Yeah, so what Willem said was very important when it comes to this alignment between a partner and a customer. And I think it's very important. So when you start a partnership, you need to realize how to align and what to align, and also why, actually. So I think important thing for a partner is to understand what a customer wants to achieve. What is the expected outcomes of a customer? At the same time, a customer needs to understand what they expect from the partner. So I saw from the poll there, there's different expectations you can have. You can expect a partner to just do all the coding or do everything, or be a good advisor for processes or whatever is important. Everything is important, but you might have some different expectations when it comes to the partner. So if the expectations on both sides of the table is not aligned, that may cause these roads not to meet, these bridges not to meet, right? So if you look at the chart at the screen, this is just an example of how you could take some on the partner side, people on the partner side, and give them a role as a specific part of the implementation process in this RACI chart. So it's just an example. This is from one of the projects we've worked on before. And we do observe that this chart can change depending on the expectations on a project. Yeah, like Britta says in the chat, is just an example. For if the scope is large or if it's small, this might change a lot. But I do think it is important that you place the roles and the accountability and the responsibility in this type of chart, so you know who is supposed to be responsible for a specific function, who needs to be informed. I tend to see that the green boxes here, the informed, this is dominating. But if it's a small project, then the eyes are filling up this chart, and the accountable has several, you can merge them with consultative responsible parts of this one. But what I think is very important is that you look at the scale of the project. If it's a very large scale project, so if you as a customer, you don't have ServiceNow from before, you're going to embark on this large transformation project. You need to set up the instance, you need to integrate with all your systems and all of your processes going into the platform, then there might be several boxes in this chart and more people are accountable. But maybe if you have your own internal resources that know ServiceNow from before, and it's not your first project, and you just need some extra help from a partner, then you might not need to have that much, I guess, dominance from the partner side inside of this. This resonate with what you're thinking, Willem?
Yeah, I think adding to the sizing as well, Anders and I had some discussions leading up to the session. What's also important to realize is the sort of basic principles of communication, right? The agile principle is a team size is a team where you can share a pizza with, something like that. And a recent example of a customer that I'm involved with is they have a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So that means their incident process, they have process owners for each company that's merging into a single instance. And you can imagine on top of the communication that brings the challenge, also a lot of political decisions. So what we decided is have a separate sort of connect with all of the incident process owners for them to make decisions. And then one single representative join that sort of rolling up to the bigger session to keep it each meeting to the size of where you can share pizza. And having this structured hierarchy, and of course, again, being still flexible in it. If you say, hey, different accountability or informed people need to be aligned slightly different during the process, yeah, keep that additional insight and take it in that partnership. Be flexible to make those adjustments and understand that people in the project or program are all human. The partner and the customer want to do the same thing, right? Have a great implementation, cost effective, while both parties can benefit from that. And I think that's the hierarchy is a good structure, but it needs to support the end goal.
And from the previous slide there with the bridges and how to align and everything, I think it's very important that we also mentioned the time management set to partner side and the customer side. One thing that's extremely important is that both the partners that you're working with and you as a customer needs to set aside time for your resources. And in the beginning of a larger project, at least, as much time as possible. So if we go to the next slide here, this is the slide that Willem made, which is very well describing of the situation. So if you set aside time for your resources and stakeholders on the customer side, and in the beginning, you might not need to do that closer to the go live date. But if you start sparsely and sort of say, everybody doesn't need to set aside time. I know you're busy. Just keep on what you're doing already. This might cause issues down the line. And the closer you get to the go live date, it might actually make you meet the deadline with lacking functionality or lots of bugs. Right, Willem?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So from Anders and I are both architects, so that's also our mindset. We like to be involved early on. And I think that's the distinction where the partner and customer relationship, are you treating your partner as a preferred supplier or really as a preferred partner or advisor? And if you want advice, you want it as soon as possible. So I see the projects and programs where the most success is meet on site, look each other in the eyes, get to know each other, even play a fun game. Really invest in that connection, that human connection that will highly pay off in the end. You can put everything in the contract, have a lot of debates at the end of a project on what's in the contract, but if you ask people, they don't really care. They care about the outcome, and the contract is just a symptom. So if you have a lot of discussion, we agreed on this on the contract or that, you're taking the human element out of it. The customer wants something, the partner wants something. There's always the green line to follow to mutual success.
And I have seen this definitely with customers who start out lean and mean. You don't have all the right people there, so you don't get all the right information. And then boom, at the end, you're like trying to staff up and do things at the last minute. And it doesn't usually go smoothly, let's say. Yeah. So that kind of brings us to our next topic, which is, how do you do this warm handoff between the partner and the customer? with my background of being in our expert services team previously here at ServiceNow, these were a lot of the things that I focused on, mostly, you just have to make sure that the customer's aware of what everything is that they have and what you've done. Because sometimes you're in a situation where they don't really engage a lot, or they just want to move on to the next thing. I think that's a symptom of both sides, actually. You're done with the project, you've gone live, and your management's like, okay, it's time for the next thing, and you're like, wait, we got to have this handoff. We got to make sure that we've done this smoothly. So I look at it as you have to plan for business as usual. What are the care and feeding, so to speak, of your instances. Make sure that you have your best practices reviewed and documented, and make sure you have your change advisory board and your code promotion and review and all of that set up and standardized to move forward. And also, plan for continued governance. And if you haven't set up governance yet because you didn't have time to do it, now is the time to make the time, because if you don't set up governance now, yeah, it's not going to continue to go smoothly for you. And I know Laszlo has some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, no, well said. I was just thinking, listening to you. There's always, almost in every project I've seen, there's two elements of a go live and a handover. There's always the kind of the political element of it. We need a win, we need a success. We need to show that this was a successful project towards our colleagues, towards our management, stakeholders, shareholders, customers, whatever. And in the background, indeed, there's often still work going on. Handovers are still going on. Documentation is still being drafted, and so on. And actually, that's okay, because that's just how it is. What's important is to acknowledge this and manage this properly, manage this accordingly, engage your organizational change management processes, and that's perhaps one area where I think just kind of feeding back to the race matrix that the guys have shown earlier is not always clear for customers what their role is with regards to that. But I would say you're always in the driving seat with that, because you have the responsibility to communicate the project, communicate the change, because that's a change, right? You're introducing something new, perhaps sunsetting something. You might have new people, or people have to learn new things, and it needs to come from the inside. Of course, your partners will be there to help. They will do whatever you ask them to do, and or whatever's in the contract, right? But in principle, you're in the driving seat. You have to sell it internally, and at the same time, of course, the actual handover. I think this is very much dependent on understanding what the BAU process is going to look like, what the team is going to look like. Is the customer or the ServiceNow team, if they even have a ServiceNow team, are they mature enough to know how to maintain and further develop the product, or do they have learning plans in place? And you have to communicate to them, considering all these factors. You have to consider all of these things when you write your documentation. When there are no technical people, then writing everything down to the nuance may not make sense to them. It may still be important to leave that behind for maybe for yourself if you come back managing the solution, or any other partner. But I think this is hard, because it's not so easy to generalize. There's no one size fits all principle here. There's a lot of things you can, of course, reuse from previous engagement, and lots of learnings. And I think your customer, regardless of how big or small or mature your customer is, they will always look at you to propose things and come with best practices and lessons learned. And with all these questions like, how did you do this with similar customers, or when you implemented similar projects, are we missing something? And I think as a customer, it is important to ask these questions from your partner. That's why they are who they are. They've got the answers, or they got the network if they don't have the answers. And this is where I'm again feeding back to, I think, what Willem said about everyone's a human being at the end of the day, and it's one team, it's one success. I've been on both sides, being on the customer side and the partner side. It's at the end, it really is the same thing. You want the project to be successful. It's the resources you work with. They, for them, it's not about getting their margins and going away. They're people trying to do a good job, and they want to see they've delivered something and they made a positive impact. And when you reach the finish line, there ideally is no much distinction between your internal resources and your partners if it's a good partnership. Yeah, that's probably what I had to add right now, Britta. I guess we could go into all the different pieces here, but I think in general we've covered a lot. But you probably want
Yeah,
to add some more.
just putting this slide together for this presentation made me realize that I don't have any kind of a warm handoff resource on the community. And a couple of years ago, I worked on a success play around warm handoffs. I'm going to try to find that content and pull an article together, because I think a lot of times, just like getting started, there's a lot of things you don't think about, like how are you going to communicate? Are you going to use Teams? You're going to be on Zoom, whatever. The same is with the warm handoff. People don't think about a lot of things. Is the customer set up for an upgrade? Do they understand what they need to do about that? Do they even understand how to contact Now Support? Because maybe the partner has handled that relationship with support and the customer doesn't know how to contact support. So I think a lot of those things are really important and oftentimes get overlooked. I would say even if the partner is going to stay on, because I know in some situations there's partners that are embedded with customers long-term, even if that partner is going to stay there, I think this process should still be completed, because the players can change at any time and you don't want to be left holding the bag, so to speak, because all the people have left that were involved in it, and you don't know why did they do that custom code, why aren't they commenting code, what was the governance process, all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, anybody else on the panel have anything they want to chime in around warm handoffs or anything about this topic in general that we haven't covered so far?
One thing that I would say is there shouldn't be huge surprises if you've managed the project correctly. That, yeah, you may want to have a much smaller group go into some of the details of the code and what have you to understand, oh, that's why it happens this way. But it shouldn't be like, oh, we need 2 weeks to do a proper knowledge transfer because we told them just go ahead and do it. And again, gets back to work as a team. And realistically, the KT should be part of your project plan, part of the closeout. So you can't complete your project until that's taken care of and all the questions are answered and your team feels comfortable.
100%. Yeah. All right, well, we're getting close here to the end, but of course I have one more poll for you all, which is how would you pick a partner? So let's see what folks would do. That you obviously, if you have a partner that's already been involved with you, you might say, oh, well, we'll just use them. You might use our partnerfinder.com resource, or you might not know. So just go ahead and feel free to put in an answer there. Like I said, there's never any wrong answers at my webinars or dumb questions. And I think one of the things that, kind of mirrors what this webinar is all about is we have a saying in the US about don't assume things because it makes an ass out of you and me. So just get it out there and talk to people and get the information shared. So. All right, so we only have a small response here, and the response is they're not sure how they would find a partner. So, well, let's talk about that then. So we have two different ways, there's generally two different ways that customers find a partner. And one is if you're net new to the ServiceNow ecosystem and you don't have an existing kind of IT partner that you work with, you could use our partner finder, and that is found on our .com site. And what you can do when you go into the partner finder is you can select what kind of partner you're looking for. Like, you want a mid-size, large size, what kind of certification level do you want? What products do you want them to be experts in? What type, where they geographically located maybe makes a difference. So you can really filter out what kind of results you want to get when you go into that partner finder. And then there's information about each of the partners there and links to their website so you can learn more about them. We don't, obviously at ServiceNow, we don't like recommend one partner over another. That's not our role, but we try to provide you with the information so that you can make informed decisions on your own. The other thing is that you might already have a partner in there that does support your IT. A lot of companies in the US have somebody like E&Y or Accenture or Infosys embedded in their IT organization. But before you say, oh, this is the right partner for this project that we're doing, make sure that they have the right knowledge in the right areas of the product in ServiceNow. Because if they don't, then, it's not going to be probably a very beneficial partnership for the two of you. So, if you do have that embedded partner, make sure that they are knowledgeable in the areas that you want to go into or are interested in getting certified in those areas before they start your project with you, not during, so that they can come into the project with the knowledge that you need so they can hit the ground running. And not going to leave you hanging. I have a link to the partner finder in our resources area that I'll share in a little bit, but let's move over to see if there's any questions. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand. It's been a pretty quiet group today, so
And maybe Britt, I can also add to the partner finding,
yes.
because we have a lot of the World Forums have already been passed, but next week we also have World Forum in Rotterdam. I think that's a nice way of meeting other customers, of course, finding out what's new in ServiceNow, but there's also a lot of partners there, so you can connect with partners. And what I also like to promote, of course, the ServiceNow community, but also ServiceNow user groups. I think it's also very valuable, even if you don't have a partner or not started implementing yet. Maybe join a ServiceNow user group session. There's quite a few around the world, so see which is the nearest to you and join it, because I also see there you can exchange experiences customer to customer, and that also means leveraging the experiences with the partners. Of course, understanding there's no guarantees, there's different humans that work for a partner, so the good experiences there, that might be a totally different team for you, but I think it gives some insight in the way they approach things, the way they structure. Does that align with what you're looking for?
That's a really good point about the users group. I'll add that to the resources slide before I post this. And the World Forums are a great place because I just came back from the one in New York. It's the first time I've been to one, and there was a lot of partners there, and it was a much smaller event than Knowledge, so you have a better opportunity to really chat up with people and get to know them a little bit better.
If there are no questions yet, can I put in my proverbial 2 cents on the same topic?
Of course.
I agree with everything that Willem was saying. And you can go to the community, but you have to be pretty specific what you're looking for. Otherwise, you may end up with, okay, this is a really great partner, but they only work in Europe or what have you. Another thing that I agree with Willemon completely is with the Snugs, because that's how I met my first partner, because they were the sponsor, and we really did have a chance to talk about what we needed, and this partner really seemed to fit very well, and we had a great working relationship for quite a few years, and then they got sold, and you know how all those things happen. The other thing that I have found useful is as you're in the community and you go to knowledge and you go to other things, you meet people and you get a good feel for those who have a good handle on things and understand stuff. And that can also be a really good source where you reach out to trusted colleagues and say, have you done this kind of thing with a partner? How did it go and who was the partner? And, you know, I've gotten some good connections that way also. And obviously, as Willem was saying, in a lot of cases, your company's auditors may have a significant ServiceNow practice. And that could be another way of working that, because the other benefit to that is if there's any auditing done into ServiceNow, they already know a lot more about how things are set up because they've been working with you.
So those are some other options of finding partners and that fit for you that I hadn't thought of because I'm not a partner. So thank you all for that. And let me skip over here to our slide where if you scan this QR code, this will take you to a community article. And this will tell you about the upcoming Ask the Experts that we have. We'll be running them through the second week in December, and then we'll be taking a break because so many different parts of the country are on holiday around that time of the year. And we thank you for coming. And also just here's the quick list of those resources that I was mentioning that I would share in the PDF here. So there is a link to the partner finder. There's also an article that I wrote, which of course is amazing because I wrote it, called Choosing an Implementation Model, about whether to work with a partner or expert services, or to work with a partner and expert services, or if you want to try to do it by yourself. And then a link to our Now Create product, which if you're not familiar with that, that's our methodology that we use. And we also encourage our partners to use that. And I know some of them use our content, if even not our methodology. And then I have a requirements gathering document there that's been really popular out on the community, as well as a project readiness checklist that can help you prepare if you're getting ready to start with a partner, or you want to just have it for the future, because this project readiness checklist you would use, like if you've already implemented ServiceNow and you're going to implement something else, you would still need to go through that readiness checklist. But that's all the content that we have for today, everybody. Last call, if there's any questions that anybody has. We've got a stacked panel here of some really great experts with a lot of its experience in ServiceNow. But maybe everybody like me is also experiencing this as their Monday. And if you don't think of questions, I always post these articles on the community with a link to the recording, as well as a link to the PDF version of this deck, so you can have it for your reference. And so we thank you all for coming today. And immediately after I close the webinar, there'll be a survey that comes out. If you could just take a couple moments to answer that. I know we're all getting surveyed to death by everybody about everything anymore, but it's just a few questions, I promise. And we really like to know how we did, and if there's any topics that you would like us to address in the future, any ways we can improve this series going forward. So thanks everybody for coming, and hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye.